The rain had been falling since sunset, a slow, steady drizzle that tapped against the roof like the ticking of an old clock, patient and relentless. The living room was dimly lit, cast in the warm orange glow of a standing lamp my mother had, bought decades ago during one of her thrift store kicks. The kind of lamp you don't notice until the power goes out and you wish you had something more reliable. But that night, it suited the mood. I was sitting across from my father, who had just poured himself a generous finger of scotch. The glass clinked softly as he set it on the wooden side table. He looked older than he had just the day before, like some weight had finally settled onto his shoulders, visible only now because he'd finally let it. I hadn't planned on staying the night. I'd just stopped by to drop off some groceries and check on the generator after the last windstorm knocked out power in half the county. But Dad looked tired, more than just the usual kind that came with age. There was a sort of hollowness, behind his eyes a silence that stretched far longer than it should have between words. When he asked me to sit down, his voice was low and deliberate. Not commanding, not pleading, just final. Like he'd made peace with telling me something long buried, something that had been eating at him in the silence of retirement. "You ever hear of the Grady case?" he asked without preamble, as if we'd been talking for hours. I hadn't. I shook my head. He didn't look surprised. "Didn't think so," he said, and reached for the scotch again. It wasn't in the papers, at least not the part that mattered. Dad had been on the force for over 35 years, most of them with the county sheriff's department. He was known as reliable, by-the-book, level-headed. The kind of cop you wanted showing up to a scene, not because he was flashy or intimidating, but because he paid attention. The kind of man who believed in the difference between right and wrong, even when the world didn't. He rarely spoke about his time on the job. I'd get the occasional surface-level story, drug busts, domestic disputes, the weird calls from the woods, but nothing like this. He leaned forward, his hands clasped tightly together like he was preparing to pray, but had forgotten how. It was 1997, October. I was 3 years into my promotion to detective, partnered with Lou Chambers. We got a call from dispatch just after 2 a.m. Disturbance at a residence about 10 miles outside city limits, middle of nowhere. Said the caller was a young girl, maybe 12 or 13. No name given. Just said, "He's coming. Please hurry." Then the line went dead. I could tell he still remembered the dispatcher's voice reciting that message, every syllable like a fresh cut. We rolled out there thinking it was a domestic situation gone sideways. Maybe a runaway scared of her dad coming home drunk. Happens, more often than you'd like to admit. But when we got to the address, it wasn't what we expected. The house was old, Victorian style, paint peeling off the wood like scabs, the porch sagging like it was tired of holding up secrets. No lights, no movement. He paused, staring into his drink like it might answer the questions still gnawing at him. Then he continued. Lou knocked. No answer. We announced ourselves, gave the standard warnings. Still nothing. I remember the way the door creaked open when we tried it. Not fully, just a nudge. Inside, it was colder than it should have been. I remember that detail because it was a mild night. 60s maybe, but the house felt like a freezer. He said the place was in disarray, furniture covered in sheets, cobwebs stretched across corners like they were trying to hold the place together. But the strange part wasn't the decay. It was the feeling, the sensation that they weren't alone. They found no sign of the girl. No evidence that anyone had been living there recently, but in the upstairs hallway, one door was shut, freshly, dust undisturbed. The rest of the house had layers of it, like snow on an untouched field, but not here. We opened the door slowly, he said, his voice lowering as if the house still had ears. Inside was a girl, pale, wearing a white dress like something out of a damn ghost movie. She was just standing there looking at the wall, wouldn't talk, wouldn't even turn around. Lou stepped in first. trying to coax her into responding. Dad stayed in the hall, uneasy. Something about the air felt wrong, charged. Then Lou reached for her shoulder, and she screamed. Not just a scared little girl scream, Dad said. A full-throated, inhuman shriek that rattled the windows and echoed through the bones. It dropped, Lou to his knees. My father pulled him back and slammed the door shut. Silence returned, so sudden it was like the sound had been sucked out of the room entirely. When they opened the door again, moments later, the room was empty. No girl, no trace. Just one thing left behind on the floor where she had stood. A small locket, cracked and rusted, with a photo of a woman on one side and a date scratched into the other. October 13th, 1967. I stared at my father, waiting for the punchline. A smirk, a wink, something to break the tension. But he wasn't joking. His eyes hadn't left the glass, but I could see the reflection of that house in them, still living there after all these years. That was 30 years ago, he said. We wrote it up as a false call. No evidence, no missing persons, no break-ins. House had been abandoned for over 2 decades. We never found the girl. But that wasn't the end. He took a long breath, steadying his hands. The calls kept coming. The calls kept coming, my dad repeated, his voice dull like an old radio signal fading in and out. Not every night, not even every month, but over the years, same location, same time of night, same voice. Just a few words, never more. Then a sentence. He rattled them off like a script he couldn't forget, even if he wanted to. He's coming. Don't let him in. Please help me. He found me again. Always followed by silence. No return number. No trace on the logs. At first, we thought it was a prank, he said. Teenagers messing around with old police stories. But every time we checked, the property was still abandoned, boarded up. Even the floorboards were rotting. No electricity, no sign of entry. We put cameras up once, those old bulky ones the department used back then. They caught static, just static, and sometimes, just sometimes, audio, like breathing, like whispering, like something waiting. He took a long sip of the scotch now, and for a second I thought he might stop, might change the subject, but he set the glass down gently, as though not to startle whatever memory was still alive in that basement. It got worse in 2002, Halloween night. The call came in at 3:17 a.m. Same voice, same fear. I was off duty, but dispatch routed it to me anyway. Said the girl mentioned my name. I sat up straighter. She knew you? She said, tell Officer Granger he didn't close the door. That's it. I didn't know what to say. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. It was cold in the room now, or maybe it just felt that way. Dad stood slowly and walked over to the shelf near the back wall. He rummaged behind some dusty books and old photo albums until he pulled out a small wooden box. He brought it to the table and opened it without a word. Inside was the locket. It looked just like he described. Worn, rusted around the edges, but the photo was still intact. A woman, young, maybe in her late 20s, with hair pinned back and a far-off look in her eyes. The kind of portrait you'd find in old family albums, faded and haunted. The date engraved on the back, October 13th, 1967, was clearer than I expected. Fresh, almost. You kept this? I asked. They told me to toss it into evidence, but there was no case, no file, no crime. So I took it home. He hesitated, and I started dreaming. This was where the story turned. My dad wasn't a man given to superstition. He didn't talk about ghosts or gut feelings or omens, but what he said next changed the way I saw him, the way I saw everything. I'd wake up at 3:17 a.m. exactly, night after night, for months. No noise, no movement in the house, just this feeling, like someone was watching, And sometimes I'd hear footsteps, not in the hallway, not outside, in the bedroom, by the bed. He paused. Every time I opened my eyes, there'd be nothing. But one night, I didn't wake up right away. I slipped into a dream first. A memory. I was back in that house, back in that hallway. The girl was there again, only this time she turned around. I didn't want to ask. I didn't want to know, but I did anyway. What did she look like? Dad took a moment. His fingers tapped nervously on the table, something I hadn't seen him do since Mom's funeral. She didn't have a face, he whispered. Just shadows. Where her eyes should have been, there was a blackness that pulsed, like it was alive. She opened her mouth and it was like a pit, deeper than anything I've ever seen. Then she said, "He's coming through the mirror." And I woke up. A long silence followed. The only sound was the rain outside, tapping against the windows like soft fingers. The walls of the basement suddenly felt closer, thicker. I went back to the house the next day, he continued. Didn't tell anyone. Just parked a quarter-mile down and walked through the woods. It was sealed shut, completely boarded, chained. But I knew something was in there. He reached into the box again and pulled out a photograph. It was black and white, clearly taken with a Polaroid. A shot of the house from the front. There, in the second-story window, was something. A shape. Vague. Indistinct. But unmistakably humanoid. I took this on a disposable camera. The day after the dream, I stared at the figure. It wasn't clear. It could have been a trick of the light. But the feeling in my gut said otherwise. There was something about the photo that disturbed me in a quiet, crawling way. Like my brain was trying to process something it wasn't meant to see. They say every town has a house like this, he said. An urban legend, a place kids dare each other to visit. But this wasn't a story. This was something else, and I wasn't the only one it followed. He pulled out a file folder now, worn, bulging, unofficial. Inside were handwritten notes, newspaper clippings, maps, sketches, every single incident linked to that house. Missing persons, reports of a man in black staring from the woods, unexplained disappearances within a half-mile radius of the property, all dated to nights following a call. And in every case, October. Always October. I leaned back, trying to process it all. Why are you telling me this now? He looked up at me, finally, and for the first time, I saw real fear in his eyes. Not the kind you see in war stories, not the kind that comes from facing down a man with a gun, but the kind that grows slowly, like mold, quiet, persistent, rotten at the core. Because last night, he said, I had the dream again. I swallowed hard. She said your name this time. We sat in silence, surrounded by ghosts and paper. The basement seemed darker now, the corners deeper. Outside, the rain had stopped, but the storm was just beginning. Dad took one last sip of his scotch and stood. I'm going back there, he said. One last time. I don't think it'll let us be until someone finishes what started. I stood too, shaking my head. No way. Not alone. He looked at me, a sad smile creeping onto his face. I was hoping you'd say that. We left before sunrise. Dad didn't sleep, and I barely did. After our talk in the basement, there was no going back to pretending things were normal. I sat in the living room in the dark while he packed a duffel bag with his old service flashlight, a revolver he hadn't touched in years, and a notebook filled with notes I hadn't seen yet. We didn't say much. There wasn't much to say. The drive out of town was quiet. The sun hadn't crested the hills yet, but the horizon had begun to glow with a dull burnt orange that made the trees look like silhouettes from another world. It was the kind of morning where the sky felt too big and the road too empty. I noticed Dad checking the rearview mirror more than he needed to. Maybe just habit, maybe something else. I used to drive this way on patrol, he said finally, breaking the silence. Back when the Grady property was just a footnote in some old logbooks. Even back then, locals said it was cursed. I looked over at him. He hadn't shaved, and the lines in his face looked deeper than usual. But his eyes were focused, sharp, like he was back on the job. "What do you think it is?" I asked. He thought for a moment. "Not a ghost, not exactly. Something older. Maybe. Something that feeds on grief, fear, regret. And it's been feeding for decades?" He nodded slowly. "Maybe longer." We turned off the main highway onto a narrower county road, cracked and worn down to gravel in places. Fog rolled across the road like smoke. Then we reached it. Grady Road, faded on the sign, twisted like the trees around it. The kind of road GPS avoids unless you force it. Dad pulled over about a half-mile from the property. The trees thickened here like they were leaning in to whisper secrets to each other. We got out. I felt a pressure in the air as soon as my boots hit the ground, like the atmosphere was heavier out here, like the world was warning us to leave. We moved through the woods in silence. Branches snapped underfoot. The smell of moss and old water filled the air. I kept thinking I saw movement between the trees, just flickers, shapes, but every time I turned my head, there was nothing. Then we saw it. The house, just like he described. Tall, crooked, broken in places, but still standing with a strange kind of stubbornness. The paint peeled in strips. The windows, what few weren't boarded, looked hollow, black, like empty sockets. We approached slowly, circling toward the back. The porch sagged in the middle. We stepped onto it, and immediately I felt it. That sense of wrong. Like the house wasn't just empty, but watching, waiting. Dad took a crowbar from his bag and pried the boards from the back door. The wood groaned in protest, then gave way. The door creaked open with a sound that felt like it echoed across time itself. We stepped inside. The smell hit me first. Dust, mildew, something sweet and rotten. The kind of smell that clings to old funeral homes. My flashlight cut through the darkness, catching cobwebs and forgotten furniture under white sheets. The wallpaper was stained with age, peeling in long curls like dead skin. The floor creaked with every step. We moved through the kitchen, past the dining room, and into the front hallway. My dad paused. "This is where we found her," he whispered. The staircase curved up into the shadows. The air got colder as we ascended. Each step felt like it took effort, not just physically, but mentally, like the house was trying to dissuade us. I felt it under my skin, a tension, a hum. At the top of the stairs was the hallway. It looked like it hadn't been touched in decades, but the dust was thin, like something had moved through here recently. My flashlight flickered, and I instinctively tapped it against my palm. A chill passed down my back. We reached the door. That door. Dad hesitated before turning the knob. The wood felt warm to the touch, almost pulsing. He opened it. The room inside was still. Nothing moved. Nothing breathed. The walls were bare. The window on the far side had long since been shattered, boarded over from the outside. But even without light, the room felt watched. At the center of the floor was a perfect circle of untouched dust, like someone had been standing there, waiting. On the wall opposite the window, someone had scratched something deep into the wood. "You let." He stepped closer, the hair on my arms rising. "You see this?" Dad nodded. "It wasn't there before." A sharp creak echoed down the hall behind us. We both turned. Nothing there. Then came the whisper. Just one word. Close. Too close. Granger. I spun, sweeping my light across the room. Nothing. No one. Dad raised his revolver slowly, eyes fixed on the hallway. We're not alone. We stepped out of the room slowly, backs against the wall. The hallway seemed longer now. The shadows moved differently. My flashlight flickered again, then steadied. As we reached the staircase, we heard it. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming from the attic. Dad looked up. The attic was sealed last. Time, he said quietly. But now the hatch was open. I didn't want to go up there. Everything in my body screamed not to. But we had come this far, and something wanted us to. We climbed the narrow ladder, emerging into darkness. The attic smelled like smoke and something bitter. My light swept across crates, old furniture, a broken mirror. Then I saw it, a shape in the corner. A girl. Back. To us. Pale. Wearing a white dress, exactly like he described. Dad raised his voice, calm but firm. "We're here to help you." She didn't move. He stepped forward. "What's your name?" Still nothing. Then she turned. I didn't scream. I couldn't. Her face was blank, not pale, blank, no features. Just smooth skin where her eyes and mouth should be. But worse than that was the mirror behind her. It wasn't reflecting the room. It was showing something else. A hallway, long, infinite, filled with doors. And behind one of them, something moved. The girl raised her hand and pointed at us. Then she spoke, not from her mouth, but from the mirror. "You let him in." The attic shook. The house groaned, then the mirror cracked, a single line down the center, and something pressed against the glass from the other side. We scrambled down the ladder, back into the hallway, then the stairs. The house fought us. Doors slammed shut. The walls seemed to bend inward. I could hear something following. Not running, not chasing, gliding. We burst out the back door and into the woods. I didn't look back. Not once. Only when we reached the car did I stop and turn around. The house stood silent, waiting. We drove in silence for a long time. Neither of us spoke until we were miles away. "What was that?" I finally asked. Dad stared ahead. "Not what?" he said. "Who?" He reached into his coat pocket and pulled something out. The locket. But it was open now. The photo inside had changed. It was no longer the woman. It was the girl, and behind her, a man, tall, dressed in black, watching. We didn't go home. After what happened in the attic, after the mirror cracked and something tried to come through, driving back to my apartment felt like a joke, as if locking the door behind me would keep out whatever we'd awakened. Dad didn't say it outright, but I knew we were both thinking the same thing. It wasn't over. In fact, I had the awful feeling it had only just begun. We stopped at an old roadside motel about 20 miles from Grady Road. The kind of place with wood paneling that smelled like wet carpet and forgotten years. I tossed my duffel bag on one bed while Dad sat heavily on the other. Neither of us took off our jackets. He was holding the locket in his hand again. I couldn't stop staring at it. The photo inside was burned into my memory now. The girl in the white dress, face turned just slightly toward the camera, and behind her, the man. He looked like a shadow pressed into reality. Too tall, too thin. His body seemed to fade at the edges, like smoke just barely clinging to form. And those eyes, not glowing, not empty, just there, watching, as if he'd been watching for a long time. "I've seen him before," Dad finally said. "Once." I turned to him. "When?" He didn't answer right away. He opened his duffel and pulled out the leather notebook he'd brought with him. It was thick, filled with old yellowed pages and clippings, bound together with string and sheer stubbornness. He flipped through until he found a sketch. Black ink, done by hand. Sloppy like it was drawn in a rush or in fear. It was him, the same man, the figure from the mirror, the presence in the photograph. This was drawn by A man named Joseph Mallory, Dad said. Used to be a detective in the next county over. Back in 1983, he went missing for 2 days after responding to a call on Grady Road. He went to that house? Dad nodded. Found him wandering down the road barefoot, clothes torn, blood on his hands, couldn't speak for weeks. I leaned forward. And when he finally talked? He wouldn't stop drawing that figure. Said he saw him behind every door, every mirror. Said the man lived in the thin places, where reality wears down like old floorboards. I felt my stomach turn. Mallory. Died 2 months later. Suicide. Slit his wrists and wrote something on the wall in his own blood. The door is open. I took the notebook from Dad, flipping through more sketches. Some were landscapes, woods, hills, staircases that led to nowhere. One showed a spiral staircase descending into darkness, with eyes along the walls. Another showed a hallway filled with open doors. But they didn't lead to rooms. They led to reflections. This guy wasn't just traumatized, I said. He was obsessed. He was hunted, Dad corrected. That word hung in the air for a long time. We didn't sleep that night. We left the lights on, checked the windows every half hour. Just before dawn, I stepped into the bathroom to splash cold water on my face. When I looked into the mirror, I paused. For a split second, I swore I saw movement behind me. A flicker, a shift in the reflection, like someone ducked just out of view. But when I turned, nothing. I didn't tell Dad. Not yet. The next day, we visited someone I never thought I'd meet. Her name was Sister Madeline, a retired nun living in a convent-turned-hospice just north of town. According to Dad's files, she used to work as a chaplain for law enforcement, specialized in cases where things got strange. She'd been called to the Grady house twice, once in 1979 and again in 1987. When we arrived, she was in the garden, pruning dead flowers like they were personal enemies. Her hands were veined but steady. Her eyes were sharp. She looked at my father and immediately said, "It's back, isn't it?" Dad nodded. Worse than before. She glanced at me. "You brought him into this?" "No," I said. "It brought me." She led us inside, into a small sitting room filled with books, candles, and old religious artifacts. There was a crucifix on every wall. Some looked handmade. "You've seen it?" she asked me. "The girl, the mirror, and the man." She didn't flinch. "Then you've stepped through the veil. You're marked." That chilled me. "What is it?" I asked. She looked at us both, then said, "It's older than the house, older than the road. It doesn't have a name, not one we can speak, but it's a traveler, a parasite. It moves where the boundary between this world and the next wears thin." "You mean, like a spirit?" "No. A spirit was once human. This was never human." She handed me a piece of paper. On it was a symbol, a circle with 3 jagged lines cutting through it, like claws. This was scratched into the wall of a girl's bedroom in 1968. She vanished. No sign of forced entry. Door locked from the inside. Dad added, "Same year. The locket was made," she nodded. "The locket is a tether," she explained. "Someone gave it as a gift or an offering. That's how it starts. An invitation. It attaches to places, to people, feeds on their sorrow. When you open a door to it, even just once, it never fully closes." I thought of the girl in the attic, the way she turned, the words, "You let him in." "So what do we do?" She leaned forward. "You find the original offering, the first tether, and you destroy it." "The locket?" "No," she said. "Something deeper, something buried." That night we returned to the house. Armed with a map Sister Madeline had drawn, we searched the basement. Behind a rotted bookshelf, we found a hidden door, small, maybe 2 feet wide. It was sealed with iron nails and smeared with something dry and dark. Blood? Paint? We didn't ask. Dad pried it open. Inside was a crawl space, claustrophobic. The air was thick with dust. We crawled for maybe 20 feet until we found it, a small wooden box half buried in dirt. When I opened it, I froze. Inside were objects, personal things, a child's bracelet, a bloody hair ribbon, old yellowed photographs, and in the center, a journal. The cover was burned. The pages, most of them, unreadable. But the few that remained told the story. It belonged to a girl named Eleanor Grady, born 1950, died unclear. The last entry read, "He came through the mirror. I gave him the locket. I didn't know. I didn't know." I looked up at Dad. This is it. The first tether. Suddenly the house groaned. The walls trembled. Then came the sound. Laughter. From the mirror upstairs. We burned the box. Right there in the woods behind the house, we doused it in kerosene and set it ablaze. The fire burned high and hot. Too hot for such a small box. And as it burned, the wind howled. Then silence. Total, complete silence. Like the world had inhaled and wasn't ready to exhale yet. Later that night, back at the motel, Dad finally slept. I didn't. I stayed up, watching the mirror, and at 3:17 a.m. it happened. The mirror cracked, just slightly, right down the center, and from somewhere deep inside, a voice whispered, "You closed the wrong door." They say every town has secrets, but this one, the one my dad told me, wasn't just a secret. It was a wound. And some wounds don't scab. They fester. They open wider. They swallow. After the fire, things were quiet for 2 days. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that felt like a trap. Dad seemed lighter for a moment. Hopeful even. He cooked breakfast the next morning, something he hadn't done since Mom passed. We talked like we hadn't in years, but I couldn't stop thinking about the mirror, the crack, the whisper. "You closed the wrong door." I kept hearing it, over and over, not just in my head, sometimes in the silence between cars, in the whistle of the wind, in the creaks of the motel floor. It felt like reality was unraveling at the edges, and whatever was behind that crack was pushing through. It started small. I woke one night and found Dad sitting on the floor staring into the bathroom mirror. Lights off, no expression. I called his name and he didn't answer at first. Then he blinked, looked at me like I had just appeared. "Thought I saw something," he mumbled. The next day, he found a photograph slid under the motel door. No return address, no handwriting, just a picture of our house. From the outside, taken that morning, whoever or whatever sent, it knew where we were. Worse, they were already close. We returned to Sister Madeline. Her hands shook more now. She said she'd felt a change in the air. "The door," she told us, "was never meant to close from this side." "What does that mean?" I asked. She lit a candle and sat across from us. "You burned the tether. You weakened its grip, but you didn't stop it. You made it angry." Dad leaned forward. "You said it came through grief, that it needed sorrow to survive." She nodded. "It consumes pain, burrows into memory, hides in regret." Something clicked in me then. The basement, the stories, my mother's funeral, the way Dad avoided the mirror for years, how the locket was always just there, untouched but never thrown out. "You let him in," I said aloud. Dad looked at me sharply. "You didn't just investigate the Grady house," I said slowly. "You opened the door." Silence. Then he spoke. "I was there," he said, "long before the call, before the little girl died, before the records. I was on patrol, still green, first year on the job. Got a call about trespassers on Grady Road. Found the house unlocked. He looked older than I'd ever seen him. I went inside. It was just curiosity at first. Then I found the room. The mirror, it was already cracked." He paused. His hands trembled. There was something on the other side. Not clear. Just movement. I looked too long. He swallowed hard. I knocked on the glass. My breath caught in my throat. Dad went quiet. For a long time. Then he said something I'll never forget. Whatever's happening now, it's my fault. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in the motel parking lot, watching the dark sky stretch out over the empty highway. Every shadow looked like it was leaning toward me. Every reflection in the car window seemed delayed, just a second off, like I was being watched from the other side. Then I saw the lights, not headlights, not anything natural, just faint blue-white flickers dancing through the trees. Like lanterns, they were coming from the direction of Grady Road. It was calling us back. We left before sunrise, no more hesitations, no motel stops, no more waiting for it to come to us. We were going to end it. The house looked worse than before. Its shape seemed off, like the angles had changed overnight. The porch was sunken, the roof partially collapsed. But somehow, it still stood. The door was open now, waiting. Inside, the air felt thick, like walking through water. Dust curled around us like smoke. The shadows didn't retreat from the light anymore. They followed it. We returned to the attic. This time, the girl wasn't there, but the mirror was fully intact. No crack, just smooth silver glass reflecting the two of us standing in that warped room, except it wasn't. In the mirror, we weren't standing still. We were smiling. I felt cold all over. Dad stepped forward. "This is where it ends," he said. "No more running." He placed his hand on the glass, and the mirror rippled. A soft, liquid vibration spread across it like oil on water. And then, without warning, he was pulled through. 1 second he was there, the next, gone. I screamed and lunged forward, but the mirror was solid again, cold, hard, still. I pounded on it. "Dad!" No answer. Then, movement. The mirror changed. Now it showed a hallway, long, endless, lit by flickering lights, doors on either side, dozens of them. One opened. My father stood inside. He turned to look at me, then the man in black appeared behind. Him! I don't remember making the choice, I just remember the pain. I punched the mirror. Flesh tore. Bones screamed. But the glass cracked, then shattered, and the world went white. When I came to, I was in the hallway, the one from the mirror. It was real, long, twisting. Doors stretching beyond logic. Behind some, I heard screaming. Behind others, nothing. Just silence. Then I saw my father. He was kneeling in front of a door with his badge number carved into it. He looked up at me. "You shouldn't be here. I'm not leaving without you." He shook his head. "This place, it's made of memory. It digs through who you were, who you wish you'd been, and then it feeds." Suddenly, the doors began to open. From inside stepped figures. People I didn't recognize, but Dad did. His old partner, shot in the line of duty. A girl, Eleanor Grady, eyes hollow. My mother. Not her, really. Just a twisted image, each one accusing, whispering. "You let him in." Dad collapsed to his knees, but I stood firm. "This isn't real," I said. "It's lies. It's bait." I reached down, pulled Dad to his feet. "You don't owe this thing anything. You made a mistake. You're human, but it doesn't get to define you." The hallway shook. The man in black stepped from the far end. His presence hit me like gravity. He didn't speak. He just raised one hand, and every door slammed shut. The walls cracked, the ceiling buckled, and behind us, the mirror appeared again. But now it was our way out. "Go!" I shouted. Dad hesitated, then ran. He passed through the glass. I followed. I woke up in the attic. Mirror shards around me. My hand was bleeding. My ears rang. but Dad was beside me, alive, breathing. The house groaned, then began to collapse. We didn't. Look back, we ran, and as we reached the tree line, the house imploded. Not in fire, not in noise, just silence. Then it was gone, like it had never been there. We never spoke of it again, not directly, but things changed. Dad smiled more. He went fishing again, visited old friends, laughed. The locket? Gone, no trace. But sometimes, when I pass by mirrors, I swear I see movement. Faint, subtle, waiting, because some doors never close. Not completely,